So welcome everybody watching today's panel session, Cybersecurity and a Global Pandemic. I'm Victoria Knight from BAE Systems, and I'm also proudly the co-chair of the Greater Manchester Cyber Advisory Group. And we've got some members of the group here today on our panel, I'm pleased to say. And we're a group that really reflects the digital and cybersecurity capabilities from across Greater Manchester. And part of our undertaking is to help drive forward inclusive economic growth for the city region and the Northwest Corridor. Part of the group's ambition is to help Greater Manchester to be on a world stage as a cybersecurity cluster, and also number one in the UK for digital security, digital trust, innovation and collaboration across our sector. And also build relationships with international partners in other global cybersecurity clusters around the world. So I guess it's particularly timely that we're having this discussion on the back of the government's integrated review of security, defence, development and foreign policy, which has just been issued. And one of the clear visions for the UK has been that cybersecurity and digital will be a cornerstone for economic growth on the back of the pandemic, and also building back better a real resilient society. So it's amazing to see that this kind of event that you're joining today is really diversifying, and it's still taking place despite all the challenges. And we've got quite a strange environment here. I've got two of the panelists who are dialing in virtually, and in the studio I've got Neil and Richard with me. So the fact that we've adapted to host this event virtually with a panel today, despite all the challenges that the pandemic's presented. And one thing that we'll be discussing is how we're increasingly acting out our lives online, and the types of opportunities and challenges that it presents to not only our economy, but public services as well. So Greater Manchester has a £5 billion digital economy, and actually the biggest creative and digital cluster outside of London. And the pandemic's had a huge impact across many industries, but one thing that it has done is driven digital transformation at a scale and pace that we have never, ever seen before. And it's changed not only our mindset, but also some of the renewed social equality pressures. And it would be fair to say that we're actually on a new trajectory. But it hasn't been without a number of significant challenges, through an increase in remote working, businesses and services moving online, all which have been vital to survival and growth. And we've also, sadly, seen an increase in the risk of cybercrime. We know many sectors have been hard hit by the pandemic across hospitality, travel, to name but a few. But some areas have actually stepped up and are actually starting to flourish across e-commerce, digital healthcare and the cybersecurity sector, which we're going to talk about today. The cybersecurity sector remains economically significant within the UK cybersecurity industry, and it's estimated to be worth £8.3 billion to the economy, with the number of firms active in the sector up by 44% in the last 2 years, with total UK revenues in the sector up by 46%, from £5.7 billion in 2017. Greater Manchester is already recognised as a cybersecurity centre for excellence, with a very strong cybersecurity ecosystem. A number of the members of that ecosystem are here today to talk to you about what that means across Greater Manchester. And Greater Manchester is also home to a number of large organisations, including the UK intelligence agency GCHQ. Together we'll continue to establish Greater Manchester as the UK and European Centre for Cyber and Digital Ethics, Trust and Security, and also research and innovation, which Richard will talk to you about in some detail later on in our panel discussion. And we're going to talk about what's happened over the last 12 months and what that's meant for our sector. Can we learn from the global crisis in the way that we live our lives online? And I'm looking to discuss these challenges and opportunities with our panel today, who will be able to offer lots of different perspectives from across government, small business, industry and academia. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to today's panellists. Neil, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Victoria. My name is Neil Jones. I'm a Detective Superintendent with Greater Manchester Police, and I'm also the Senior Responsible Officer for Cybercrime Policing in the North West region, which brings together 6 of our regional police forces and our regional organised crime unit capability. So responsibility for setting the strategy and direction of travel around how we police and try and protect our communities from this ever-growing threat of cybercrime. But importantly, I'm here today as a director and founder of the Cyber Resilience Centre for Greater Manchester, which is an innovative public, private and academic partnership which was born out of the Greater Manchester Cyber Advisory Group, which you mentioned, and really shows the strength of partnership working and engagement at a local level in Greater Manchester, which is becoming recognised nationally as innovative work of how we protect our communities, and in particular our small to medium-sized businesses from this threat of cybercrime, which I'm looking forward to talking about more as we go through today.
Fantastic, Neil. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts and views on some of the subjects which I know you're an expert in around cybercrime. Saskia, I'll come to you next. Welcome and thank you for taking part in the panel.
Hi, so I'm Saskia Kaplantz. I'm the co-founder and director of Digital Interruption, which is a smaller cybersecurity agency based out of Manchester. We do sort of normal, traditional cybersecurity stuff like pen testing and training as you'd expect, but we also create cyber tooling, so specific tooling around security aimed at developers and testers and that's QA testers rather than security testers, to try and help DevSecOps and the left shift of security into the development pipeline. I'm also the Director of Innovation for AI, Machine Learning and Cyber at Host, and I'm helping them pull together a digital blueprint around cyber innovation and an acceleration program around cyber innovation in cyber and AI as well, to try and replicate some of the achievements that Digital Interruption have had over the last year with the innovation work that we've been doing.
Brilliant, and there's plenty of disruptions. Thank you, Saskia. Richard, I'll come to you next.
Well, hello everybody, and thank you, Victoria. I'm Richard Green. I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor with responsibility for research and knowledge exchange across Manchester Metropolitan University. And I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment or two about the ways in which the universities across Greater Manchester are working with local government, organisations and businesses to really help build this cybersecurity ecosystem that we're talking about today. And I'm particularly going to talk about a number of projects. One of them is the Cyber Foundry, and another is the AI, the Artificial Intelligence Foundry, which are really good examples of how that ecosystem is being developed.
Fantastic, thank you. And Raj, how are you? And thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Victoria. My name's Raj Bidhyani. I work for Raytheon UK. I'm the head of digital, working in their national security cyber business. Raytheon UK have a presence in Manchester and are committed to building cyber talent within the Manchester area. Brilliant,
thank you, Raj. So last year at the Digital City Festival, one of the key talking points was about cyber security and the intelligence industry and how it's significantly changed within the last few years. It's safe to say that the expectation of further changes have become something of an understatement over the last 12 months, and the sector's since had to evolve very, very rapidly. So what are the main drivers for this, and how has the sector needed to respond? And in terms of what does this mean for the sector, and how has it had to shift focus? And Neil, maybe I could come to you first for your thoughts and views.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about cyber, I'm going to include fraud, if that's okay, because
yeah, sure, absolutely.
what we know from the data that we gathered nationally through the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau with our colleagues in the City of London, is that around 86% of fraud is now committed online, so it's kind of what we call cyber-enabled. And typically we see about 25 to 30,000 reports of cyber and fraud to law enforcement nationally every month. So it can be north of 400,000 a year at a cost to actual victims of around £2.4 billion. And over the last 12 months, what we've seen is whilst the volume of reporting has been fairly static, it's actually started to increase in the last 2 reporting months to, sort of north of 40,000 reports each month. But what we saw very rapidly at the onset of the pandemic was a shift in focus of the types of cyber-enabled frauds that were being committed by the criminals. And it's that ability to adapt and pivot very quickly to changing circumstances where many of the businesses and governments around the world had to adapt very quickly, but so did the criminals. I remember very avidly that I think within 15 minutes of the government sending a text message out to everybody, you may remember after the Prime Minister's briefing on the 23rd of March last year, within 15 minutes I received a smishing message from fraudsters trying to get me to click on a link to go through to give some details over to them. So the fact they had that ready to go gives an indication of the how nimble organised criminals can be. So what we saw very quickly at the start of sort of the first and second quarter of 2020 was a shift in crime type. So whilst volume was fairly static, the criminals would move towards COVID and the pandemic as being a vehicle to deliver, a malicious link to a unwilling, unsuspecting victim to try and get them to click on. So we saw maybe some moves away from traditional online fraud and cyber, but towards things around sort of COVID scams. And now as we move into 2021, I think the thing to look out for now will be vaccine scams. So we saw things around the kind of the COVID loans, the Build Back Better, the support schemes, the furlough schemes. But I think it's around considering that the criminals are very adept and responsive at following the global narrative around the pandemic and being able to get something into your inbox or into your messaging system via like a text message just to try and get you hooked on it. But also more broadly, I guess, for society, what we've seen is that rapid shift to sort of moving online. Is things like online shopping has been massively targeted because there are more people, shopping online in their personal lives, but also doing business online. Action Fraud have just released today a new report around the amount of social media that's been hacked. So in the last 12 months, there have been over 15,000 reports of social media accounts being hacked for the purposes generally of fraud. And this is disproportionately affecting the business community with about £3.8 million worth of losses. So we've seen traditional businesses who may have just featured on the high street and had a small physical presence historically, who rapidly shifted and digitally transformed their small business to move online and setting up things like small e-commerce shops, maybe an Instagram shop, or selling stuff via your Etsy's, your online high street stores, but actually then being a target for those criminals and fraudsters and being quite heavily impacted where it hurts them in their pocket. So it's really around the global pandemic has changed the way that business is operating, the way that society is living its lives and increasingly spending time online. And what I think is really important to me and what I'm passionate about is how do we help give our communities the knowledge of how to protect themselves from becoming a victim in the first place. And that's one of the great partnerships that I'm involved in and what the ambitions of our cyber advisory group at a Greater Manchester level is set up to encourage that security and trust in particular.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you, Neil. And I mean, it's not just the responsibility of the IT, it's about the people and the way that we use it as we increasingly live our lives online. And Saskia, I was wondering if I could come to you to just talk about, not only the types of shifts in behaviour, but how we've sort of built this into the fabric of organisations culturally as well.
I think what we have to take into consideration as security professionals at the moment is just how significantly outnumbered we are. There are 14 million devs in the world, and we are trying to fight a losing battle in terms of security testing and ensuring that things are fit for end users. 71% of mobile apps will never be tested for security. 80% of IoT apps will never be tested for security as things stand at the moment, and they are only increasing. We were actually given an Innovate UK grant for one of our tools, which is called Rex, which is an Android application security scanner, as a COVID response because of the sheer amount of organizations moving online, mobile devices moving online, mobile applications being created as a response to COVID. I really do think that we need to consider how we create software to make sure that it is as secure as possible for the users, and we need to put those things in place ourselves. And I think we need to create an environment by which security isn't a blocker. Security is as easy as possible for organizations and for the users of the software that's being created. And I think we have a bit of a way to go in terms of the security community commercially making that easier. There's a lot of money in cybersecurity, and if you have commodities that are difficult to access, you can charge more for them. And I think we are quite guilty of that as a community.
Right, okay, that's interesting. I mean, and the principles of secure by design are things that are evolving and adapting as our industry is trying to keep pace with the threat landscape and the increase in cybercrime that Neil's touched on. And last year, actually, there was a report from the National Cyber Security Centre, the NCSC, that stated that around a quarter of cybersecurity incidences were related to COVID-19. And they also saw a 10% rise in the increase of incidences and a 33% increase in the number of victims, which is a concern, particularly when you talk about the volume of cybersecurity professionals that are across the UK. And I just wanted to touch on, really, Raj, if I could come to you to talk about some of those challenges and opportunities for our industry. And some of the key takeaways, really, when it comes to digital security.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's two things here. I think there's the massive skills gap which exists within our industry, but there's also the education of new threats which emerge. So with the convergence of IT and OT being operational technology, you now have a whole new domain of internet-enabled things, be it lab equipment or even nuclear plants, which are largely operating without really understanding the threat that exists. And then on the flip side, you've got the massive cyber skills gap, where we'll see later on this year, when furlough ends, there will unfortunately be a whole bunch of people who will be unemployed. How can you take those individuals and train them up to be the next generation of cyber warriors who can then protect our critical national infrastructure? So I think the whole industry needs to be more aware that information technology and operational technology is converging, and with the government's ambition to be a science and technology superpower by 2030, and in the integrated review, the Prime Minister's ambition to spend £800 million on creating an advanced research invention agency called ARIA. We need to be aware that these infrastructures which we're building also need to be secure, but then we also need to understand what are the threats out there, and we need to have a workforce that can address those threats.
Yeah, thank you, Raj. And I think it's a really important point that you raise around our future workforce planning and inspiring young people to consider careers in cyber, particularly given the landscape and actually the scope of the challenge that and the ambition that we have. That's been outlined in the integrated review, as you've touched on. And one of the things actually that you mentioned is probably, I want to come to Richard next actually to touch on research and innovation. And Raj mentioned that ARIA has had about circa £800 million worth of funding to really put the UK on a world stage in terms of research and innovation, particularly across the areas of science, technology, engineering, and I would like you to offer your thoughts and views as an academic, please.
Thank you. I mean, these are really fundamental questions, aren't they, Victoria? And Raj has raised a really important issue about the skills gap. And that's something where I think Greater Manchester really can lead the way and achieve what we're all here to do, really. There's some terrific universities across Greater Manchester and the North West. If you look at my own university, Manchester Metropolitan, the University of Manchester, the University of Salford, we've got close to 100,000 undergraduates, all of whom could be thinking about careers that are relevant to cybersecurity, because it's such an all-encompassing topic. And how we work together to develop the courses that those people will take, how we tailor them, how we give people the appropriate graduate skills so that they can fit into the industry is something that we're very much actively involved in at the moment. One of the projects that I mentioned earlier was something called the Cyber Foundry, and that's a partnership between the universities I've mentioned, but also the University of Lancaster, GMCA, and a number of other agencies. And what that does is it looks at trying to provide employees with particular skills. So it's a sort of two-phase program. There's a sort of training and development in phase one, which is around seminars, workshops, online facilities to help particularly businesses upskill their cybersecurity awareness. And for some of those businesses, they'll actually move forward and work in partnership with academics in those universities to develop specific products or to address particular technical challenges. So we're addressing it really from two fundamental positions. One is about the pipeline through university and in fact before university, and there Greater Manchester, as I said, has got such a huge range of students, and importantly they come from a very diverse background. So when we're talking about some of the wider issues in terms of the cybersecurity industry, it's great to have a diverse workforce coming into that, and for people across Greater Manchester to have the really high quality jobs that the industry will provide for us. That's one part of it, but we also need to be really cognizant of how we upskill people who are already in the industry through things like degree apprenticeships and the various forms of continuing professional development that the universities offer. So it's a fundamental question, Raj, and one that I think Greater Manchester is probably uniquely placed to address.
Yeah, and I mean, Raj mentioned that Raytheon have a presence in Greater Manchester, as do BAE Systems, GCHQ, Boohoo, Booking.com. Many organisations that are fundamentally digital are choosing to come to Greater Manchester because of all the things that you've talked about, Richard, and it really does have access to a really diverse, talented skills and future workforce. And I think what really captures the essence of Greater Manchester is not only the Cyber Foundry and the AI Foundry that you mentioned, which is a collaboration between Salford, MMU, Manchester and Lancaster University, really captures the spirit of Greater Manchester and also that extending northwest corridor, which I think presents a fantastic opportunity for Greater Manchester to really be world class in terms of the cyber industry. However, Neil, you've touched slightly on the cybercrime threat, which has never been greater, and cyber criminals, and sometimes state-sponsored actors that are taking advantage of the pandemic. And you touched on, some of the text message that you received within 24 hours of the Prime Minister making the announcement about the first lockdown last year, and how actually, the cyber criminals will evolve to change and use different techniques with people from all walks of life, and particularly with the rise in e-commerce, target businesses as they increasingly take their lives online. And there's a real need to ensure the safety and security of online activity. So do you think over the last year that this has just been accelerated and pushed to the forefront? Or has there actually been an increase in the level of cyber criminal activity online?
I think the threat has always been there, but as the threat landscape, as we would call it, has expanded because the number of people who are living their lives or operating their businesses has increased significantly online. The nature of the attacks that the criminals are deploying naturally grows with that growth in the landscape. So, I mean, the best example is a bit like chucking a net in the sea. You know, if there's only 10 fish in the sea where you cast your net, you'll catch the 10 fish. If there's suddenly 100,000 fish in that same bit of the sea, which is what we've seen over last year, the criminals have cast their net because what they're not doing is targeting the individual. And I think this is a common misconception, maybe because of a lack of communication from many areas around how the attacks are actually carried out. So often, either a local resident or a small business owner will say, "Well, why would I be targeted?" So yeah, we'll talk about critical national infrastructure, and people be aware of the allegations of Russia trying to infiltrate the US elections and things. You go, so if you're a small business owner in Oldham, you go, well, why would my little manufacturing firm be targeted? And you go, well, you're not being targeted. Everybody is, all of the time. Yeah. And that's the sad reality, is that it isn't a matter of if, sadly, it's when. And it's how do we protect ourselves, because that net will be cast. And if you don't have your defences there, and what picking up on what Saskia was saying around having the security built in as a default position, then you're going to be more susceptible to it. And I think the easiest way to make sense of that is just basic analogies, really. That most of us would get up in the morning, and if we weren't working from home, we would probably, as we leave our house, we would check our windows were shut and that our door was locked. We may set our burglar alarm. We might have some security lights. And sadly, that's a reality of living in a modern society where we've got things that other people might want to steal from our houses. I think when we are operating online, we need to start to think about online security in a similar way and think, is my router secure? Do I have a password? Am I using multi-factor authentication? Do I have a strong password that is using the NCSE guidance, think 3 random words? And are we using password managers? Because we'll all forget our passwords, we might be tempted to write them down. So that is no different to me than protecting your house from the burglars. This is about protecting your online assets, your valuables, whether it's your kids online, whether it's your online accounts for your online banking, whether it's your small business. It's about adopting a similar approach to how we protect ourselves as a society. Mm-hmm. And it's the responsibility on us around the table today and the sectors and the businesses we represent to try and get that message out to our communities in a way that they will understand and they'll find it easy to implement, or as Saskia says, kind of bake it in so that it's secure by default. IoT devices need to be secure by default when they come out of the factory, rather than putting the impetus on the end user to put a password in and change the default admin name once they've received it, because they haven't got the technical knowledge to do it. So it's how can we support each other to look after the broader good, really.
Sure, and Saskia touched on actually some of the security challenges around the volume of IoT devices coming on stream. And I guess what you're saying, Neil, is that it doesn't seem that it's just a cybersecurity industry challenge, that actually it's not just our responsibility as industry experts. Saskia, as an expert from the cybersecurity industry, I wondered if you could offer some thoughts and views on who else's responsibility it was and how we can help combat some of those challenges.
I think in terms of criminality, what we don't always realise is it's exactly the same criminal gangs that are responsible for criminality across the board as for online criminality. So you will see that there's a correlation between a reduction in armed bank robbery and an increase in online bank robbery, because it's harder to rob a bank with a gun these days than it is to break into one online, which is why banks spend so much money on security, because they don't want to lose all their money. And this is going to be the same in the kind of pandemic environment that, less shops are open, less things are happening, less people are leaving the house, everything is moving online. So therefore the attack vector is online, so criminality is going to move online. There's been a very persistent phone scamming campaign going on over the last sort of couple of months, where a person apparently from HMRC gets in touch with you and says that they're going to take you to court if you don't give a load of details to them. So they're trying to sort of harvest all sorts of information from people, but mostly like bank details from people. So all of these sort of financial scams are going to increase as you don't have other kind of criminal activity as much as you would have done in a world that doesn't operate from its living room. I think education is super important, and educating people to understand the different kinds of scams that can happen. I think that needs to sit across multiple agencies, and I actually think we kind of also need to be thinking about how much more tech savvy young people are at the moment than we really give them credit for, and seeing how potentially we can get younger people to support older people online to make sure that they're safe as well. Though I do have to say, like having looked at some of the demographics personally, just as an out of interest because of my family, I found that if you put sort of the younger members of the family's email addresses into Have I Been Pwned, they get much more hits as having been in breaches than the older members of the family. Now, obviously, this isn't to do with password strength or complexity, but it does show that younger people operate much more frequently online than older people do. And I think we do need to understand really like the risk model or attack vector for individuals and help them understand how to operate in that environment in the way that is safest for them. Like you say, individuals aren't targeted. It's masses of people that are targeted. If you look at Facebook scams, they are invariably at the over 60s, because an idea that people who are over 60s are going to be less savvy, or more people over 60 are going to be less savvy in terms of falling for these scams. So I do think there's like community groups, there's different mechanisms that we can reach out to just to make sure that people are aware of what their attack vector is, and then work with them to simplify things. Security does not have to be as scary or as complicated as we often make it out.
Yeah, sure. And it can be simple things. I was having a conversation with my daughter actually about I was trying to do some home IT fixing issues during the pandemic just before a call, and the computer stopped working, so home tech support kicked in, and I asked her what her password was to plug in, and at that point I started having a conversation with her about how we need to keep changing passwords, and that it shouldn't be as simple or easy to identify as the one that she'd given me. And so, you know, I think that this pandemic and what we faced is actually, you know, probably bringing some of these conversations, which is really healthy, to the fore in society that you've touched on, whether that be the over 60s on Facebook or a younger generation with, you know, potential targets through Snapchat or Instagram or some of the other social channels. Raj, I was wondering if you could maybe touch on some of the things from your perspective that you think have been sort of brought to the fore, really.
Yeah, sure. So I guess from our perspective at Rating UK, we've certainly seen that there's more and more people working from home due to the pandemic. Therefore, if you take, you know, example, the stamp duty holiday has led the whole property industry to go into some massive explosion of activity, and therefore you've got mortgage lenders with their employees at home handling very, very sensitive information. And from a threat perspective, your biggest threat is from your own people, from your own employees. So what we found is that organizations are now moving to really assess their governance, risk and compliance, and looking at common standards such as NIST or ISO to assess their cybersecurity posture. And I think something which we've seen in the UK is that there isn't enough standardization of cyber policy to ensure that organizations are working to an expected level whereby you can be secure and you can constantly test your infrastructure. Compared to the US, I think the UK have got some way to go to diversify the Cyber Essentials certification for organizations, for example. But I think also what I would say is that the pandemic has taught us that not everyone wants to be behind a screen every day, and not everyone wants to do things on a computer. And I think the challenge we'll find is that with our UK high streets evolving and moving away from having personal contact when you go to a bank, for example, we do need to educate people of all ages to be a bit more cyber aware and change passwords when they should do, and actually make sure that that link saying you've got a free iPhone, click here, people are aware that they shouldn't do that.
Thank you, Raj. And you talk about the change in buying behaviour, societal changes that we've touched on, and how the high street will change. And last week it was quite timely that the government published Global Britain in a Competitive Age, and the integrated review of security, defence, development and foreign policy. And this was on the back of a national review that highlighted how critical cyber is in defence and economic and opportunity. And it states the need for the UK to keep adapting, innovating, investing and collaborating to maintain and extend a competitive edge as a responsible democratic cyber power. And the pace that technology is changing is in the way that individuals that we've touched on, in the way that we interact online, the types of channels, platforms that we use, and the types of things that we're designing, securing, that we're bringing to market. Organisations all need to make use of these, and I think that because of some of the things that we've talked about, the collaboration amongst some of the universities, the Cyber Resilience Centre, the work that organisations are doing, all of the panellists are part of the Greater Manchester Cyber Advisory Community. We've got a fantastic opportunity for Greater Manchester to be at the forefront of that. And in terms of innovation and research, I just wanted to come to you, Richard, to really talk about what of some of those key contributing factors are, really.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on a couple of points that Saskia made, which I think are really relevant here. One of them is the nature of where crime is and the movement of crime from maybe physical crime to online crime, and what that actually looks like in reality. So we sometimes, when we talk about cyber, I'm sure people start to think it's all about computer science, it's all about mathematics, it's all about codes or code breaking or those sorts of things. But actually, I think what we're beginning to see across the universities is much more involvement in other aspects of it. So, for instance, at Manchester Met, my university, we have a research group that is looking at the use of language in child abuse online, so that they can work out more about what's happening. We've got a research group that is looking at the ethics of artificial intelligence that links into the AI foundry that you mentioned earlier, Victoria. And we're also looking at all forms of different types of behaviour. Saskia talked about age-related behaviour, I think, in the sense of the way in which different age groups use social media differently. And in our Faculty of Education, we're looking at younger people. These are all ways in which things have changed since more things have moved online, and that's a way in which the criminal gangs are able to continue with their activities, and we're having to adjust with that. So that then brings you to the sort of nature of the partnerships. And again, Saskia said something really that struck a chord with me. You mentioned, Saskia, that you'd had a grant from Innovate UK. And this is a really important scheme, which basically brings universities and businesses together. It's run by Innovate UK, which is one of the UK's research and knowledge exchange funding agencies. And what happens is the business puts some money into the project, usually about a third or half of it. The government puts a grant in. The university then appoints a graduate, and that graduate works between the company and the area of special interest within the university. And it's called a knowledge exchange, a knowledge transfer partnership, a KTP. What's really interesting is that both Manchester Metropolitan University and the University of Manchester are in the top 5 or 6 in the country for the number of these relationships that they have. So across Greater Manchester, when you combine it with the contribution that the University of Salford makes, we're a really interesting ecosystem that has been developing those forms of business-university cooperation over a number of years. And I think that's put us in a really strong position to bring forward the sort of collaborations that we've been talking about.
They're fantastic, and that's just a fantastic example of what will set Greater Manchester apart. So thank you. Raj, you've got an organisation that are in Greater Manchester. What do you think will set Greater Manchester apart and bring it to the forefront?
Sure, yeah. So Raytheon have a cyber academy in Manchester, which is a partnership between DCMS and then GMCA, as well as Lancashire Digital Skills Partnership. So we essentially take up to 100 students and we train them at a foundation level within cybersecurity, and they can be from all backgrounds, including those that have been impacted by COVID redundancies, particularly in hospitality and tourism. And then we train them up at a foundation level, and then we offer them out to organisations such as Bupa, TalkTalk, Sodexo, and also Salford City Council. And I think by doing that, we're helping Manchester look to the future and have a workforce that is not only relevant but also prepared to deal with all of the threats which are coming up. And I think as an industry, we need to move away from being very London centric and look at other parts of the country to ensure that everyone has equal opportunity, irrespective of gender or race. This is about having a diversity of thinking and thought, which is really what the Cyber Academy aims to achieve.
That's fantastic. And Neil, I know that you've spent quite a significant amount of time establishing the Cyber Resilience Centre in Greater Manchester. Along with that, which I personally think will be one of the things that will set Greater Manchester apart and put it on, and not only as a #1 city in the UK for cyber and digital, but also in Europe, and make a stamp globally about what our industry stands for. What are some of the other aspects that you think that will really bring Greater Manchester to the fore?
Well, I think it is those partnerships which Richard and the other colleagues around the table have mentioned, really. So you're right, we established the Cyber Resilience Centre about 18 months ago as a not-for-profit, but we got support, as Richard said, from Greater Manchester Combined Authority. They gave us some financial support. We've got 6 of our larger corporate businesses in Greater Manchester who've invested in supporting us, as have the Home Office. So we built the CRCs as the first in the country, modelled on the Scottish Business Resilience Centre, which has been knocking around for quite a few years. But what we did, acting then as what we call a pathfinder to national policing, is the Home Office have now provided funding to build 10 cyber resilience centres, regionally aligned across all of the UK, by the end of this year. So, as you say, actually building that strength of a partnership, working together at a local level within Greater Manchester with the Cyber Foundry, with our universities, giving real-world work experience to our students to develop that talent pipeline that we talked around, to ensure that they can go into industry on graduation and contribute to protecting our society, making an affordable, accessible cybersecurity guidance and help and support to our businesses and our communities. That's what really sets Greater Manchester apart. I think, as you say, not just locally, regionally, but probably on an international stage, that we grasp the nettle and we take the opportunity where others maybe haven't seized it as early as we have done, because of the partnerships that we've got established. That's why the CRC is recognised as a key project within the Greater Manchester Digital Strategy, and it then gives us that platform to celebrate the partnership working that we are doing and the community spirit, really, that we have in Greater Manchester that we've been able to build. The fact that you and I can have a conversation across the table is a testament to that itself. That you think,
well, we used to be able to.
We used to be able to, but now we can have an over conversation. Being recorded and live streamed. But yeah, the fact that we've got the government agencies, government sectors coming together with the private sector in a collaborative way to explore what are the challenges, what are the future challenges, and the fact that policing are having those conversations and saying, well, we can't solve this, but how could you help us with your organisation? How could Saskia or Raj help us with their organisation? How could Richards University researchers and graduates or postgrads help us with unpicking some of those problems? The fact is, it's all on our doorstep, but we have that cyber community which has brought itself together and is quite action orientated. So
Absolutely.
we are developing initiatives that have actually got a tangible benefit to the community, and will make a difference hopefully for everybody's sort of online security and trust.
And I think that, capturing the spirit and essence of partnerships, collaborations between industry, academia, the support that's available for small, medium-sized businesses as well as industry partners really captures the essence of the cyber advisory group that exists, that's been supported very heavily by the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. And I was fortunate enough to be introduced to Saskia through that forum, and our paths may not have normally ever crossed, but it really captures the essence and spirit of the way that things are done across Greater Manchester. And Saskia, I wanted to come to you actually, although we're not in person today and you're not sitting across the table from me, that we've adapted and evolved this to be able to bring you to us on a screen. I wondered what your thoughts and views were about what will put Greater Manchester on a local, national and international stage.
I think it's the number of smaller organisations that we have that we are supporting to have bigger voices. I personally think that the future innovation actually sits with smaller companies like mine. We take bigger risks and we need rapid commercialisation of our products, otherwise our companies go under. So we do smaller, more impactful things. And I know that certainly for my company, we've had 3 Innovate UK grants over the last year. We had one for Rex, an extension for Rex, and then we had another grant that was for Raptor. Raptor is, it uses AI and machine learning to predict, well, not at the moment predict, but it puts malware, APTs and malware into families. I think that's where we kind of need to be moving in terms of cybersecurity now, is how we get smarter, how we have smarter cybersecurity. It's still very manually focused. It still focuses very much on individuals. There was a very big push before COVID where we talked a lot about the human side of cybersecurity, and that is really important, but we have really over-focused, in my opinion, on the human side of cybersecurity, and now we need to talk about the technical side of cybersecurity, because if we are going to keep up with just the sheer trajectory of how quickly innovation happens, we need to find smarter ways of protecting things. I absolutely love that we have the sense of community that we do in Greater Manchester. That is just Greater Manchester, though. It is a very community-driven place. So it kind of makes sense that that collaborative innovation would happen here and would happen well here. And I really think that's what we need to focus on for how we make these changes across the UK, how we move to the next stages, is we achieve more if we do things together. We are stronger together. If we as a cybersecurity community can start working in collaboration, we will make such greater impacts. And I think we need to focus on the more holistic area of cybersecurity as well. We tend to focus on one thing at a time. You know, we focus on users, or we focus on businesses, or we focus on products. But actually, we need to focus on all three. You could have Cyber Essentials Plus, you could have a really, really secure business, but if the product that you are putting out there stores passwords in plain text or doesn't protect API endpoints so that basically everything that you're doing is open to the internet, that Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus is basically useless. And all of your users, however secure their passwords are now at risk. So what we need to do is make sure that we are seeing this holistically and communicating out holistically what we need in terms of cybersecurity, so that we're squaring that circle.
And I think that really sums up the essence of the discussion today, really, that holistically we all collectively have a responsibility, and it's, yes, we're making progress actually at a rate that we've never seen before across the industry, but it's not just us that's responsible, it's everybody to address some of the societal issues that we face, and the cybersecurity industry can play a part in that and has a role to play in that, but we're not the only part of that. It's been a fantastic discussion today, and it's been fascinating, relevant, and very thought-provoking. And sadly, I'm afraid it brings us to the end, but I just wanted to thank each of our panelists, Neil, Richard, Saskia and Raj, both virtually. I think we've managed quite well, actually, to adapt in light of the circumstances. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for those watching this panel session. And I hope that you've taken away some of the points that we've touched on, and you can start bringing those into your organisations and your daily lives to make the UK a better place to live and work. Thank you very much for your time.